officially call the meeting to order. I'll do a roll call of the working group members. It's kind of a formality. Bob Carroll, Doreen DeFazio, Victoria Duckworth, Lindsay Fox, Anne Marie Foley.
Here.
Deborah George.
Here.
Brian Houle.
Here.
Chantel Kimball.
Here.
Essex Petrie. David Robbins here. Sue Robbins. Colleen Roy. And Roshana Tangi. So we have 5 members present, as I mentioned. Maybe not everybody had joined at the time. Linda Hassinger had submitted her resignation this afternoon, which brings our membership total down to 13, which means 7 would be a quorum. So without a quorum, we are not able to take any votes. So there will be no, we'll skip over approval of meeting minutes. And primarily on our agenda for this evening was the chapter reviews of open space and recreation and economic development. So shall we, I don't know.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, well, we have a lot of material to cover, about 35 to 40 minutes for each chapter. So chapter presentation plus discussion, followed by a conversation about MBTA with Gabe. So as David said, we'll start with open space, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues Sam and Gabe.
Hi, everyone. So in the open space chapter, I know we have the key findings, but you can sort of generalize the chapter even further into a discussion about the availability of resources and like the capacity of the town to manage, promote, and maintain those resources. And so the key findings here are intended to present some of the primary concerns, and then the goals will then help address those concerns. So for the first key finding, I discussed how the residents care deeply about preserving natural open space in town, and how lots of this land remains unprotected. And then I describe how the forest fragmentation can create sort of a cycle of even further fragmentation that like then reduces forest health, and then consequently leads to like less quality forest land for the community to enjoy. And then in the second key finding, I talk about how there are many recreational offerings in town, and the offerings continue to grow as the population grows, but the recreation department is not growing to sort of keep pace with the growth of the population, and as a result, a lot of the facilities are also becoming overburdened. And then the third key finding was written by Gabe, so we can toss it over to Gabe for this one.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry if I haven't done this with you guys yet, so I don't exactly know the format. But yeah, I took Elena asked me to take a look at sort of incorporating the draft goals and objectives, or I guess it's objectives and action items for trail, specifically related to trails, and sort of put together some background information and put together kind of what we like key findings regarding that. So I think trails present a really useful tool for the town of Grafton. I think the way I like to think about it is they achieve 2 separate but very important objectives for Grafton. I think the one big thing is that obviously they provide a clear add to the recreation system. You can tailor trails to serve different user groups. And I think Central Massachusetts in general is a region that has a decent amount of outdoor recreational assets, but a lot of our towns don't necessarily do a good job of promoting them. And I think a lot can be done to kind of build out towns as destinations for outdoor recreation. And so trails can be a big part of that. The other thing is that I think trails, which I don't know always gets commented on, because most people just think about, oh, I'm out biking on a trail, I'm hiking, but I think trails can also provide a really good add-on to a good like pedestrian transportation system in a town. Bike lanes are obviously an important part of that conversation, but there's parts of town where you can't put bike lanes, or it might not be comfortable to ride if you're not an experienced cyclist. So trails can provide a way to connect different areas with bike infrastructure. Yeah, I think those are kind of the two main points I tried to draw on, and I think yeah, trails can serve a lot of cool purposes for a town. And Grafton is really well positioned, kind of being directly southeast of Worcester. I think this is a part of the region that does not have very well promoted outdoor recreation in general. And I think you're right up on a bunch of towns that potentially could be like bikeable to and from. And that's something that would be cool to take advantage of.
So moving along into the goals and strategies, under the first goal, we sort of took the key findings, like each of them, and sort of provided general recommendations for each of the key findings as they relate to open space and recreation as a whole. So for the first three objectives, we sort of divide the solutions into topics of first, management, maintenance, and funding. That's sort of covered under the first objective. And then we move along into accessibility with the second goal, and then get into like a discussion of strategies regarding equitable expansion of these resources. And then in objective 4, we sort of cover how like the build out of the sort of townwide trail system. And then I don't know if you wanted to talk more about the goals for that object, or the strategies for that objective, Gabe, or if you think you covered it.
Yeah, I think. Well, are we going to get into the goal narratives, or just kind of do an overview right now?
Yeah, we should.
I was just thinking of an overview, but
So basically, going to some of the goals and action items, so we don't have
Sure.
time for the entire thing, but
Okay.
the ones that are important.
okay.
Um,
Well, then I can start talking about some of mine then, I guess, for the first few. So the first action item under like increasing the resources for active for the active and passive recreation. This is sort of an overview of how the capital improvement plan was sort of created, and sort of recommendations for further developing that plan, and more of a discussion of some of the future visions for some of the capital improvement strategies, or the capital improvement projects. And then going into action item 2 for this one. This is sort of discussion of like how capacity could be further built up through partnerships and collaborations with regional organizations. For the third one, what's the third one here? That was increasing group usage of existing resources. So talking about how there are some existing group activities that are promoted through the town, but that sort of building up the portfolio of different group activities and events can sort of help foster more community engagement, and just help improve the recreational scene of the town. And the second objective is sort of like we get into like defining accessibility pretty broadly, to sort of cover the different ways that the town can make the different recreation resources more available to everyone. Part of accessibility is like the ability to, or like awareness of the resources in town, and that can be improved through better signage and wayfinding. So that's one of the strategies that we talk about, and we get into how the town has an existing wayfinding project that is just nearing completion, and then we sort of talk about how there could be some further development in that area. Getting into the second action item, that was preparing paper and digital resources. I talk about how like MyRec, the new recreation department program, is pretty convenient in a lot of ways, and it's done a good job at sort of helping to keep things organized and like having everything in sort of a centralized platform. But then I just talk about how, the communication can be further developed with the community. And then for the third one, this is just talking about like where the parking needs are in the town. And then getting into objective 3, we talk about like the expansion of different recreation facilities, what some needs are that were mentioned, what some ideas people had for different types of recreational expansion. And then we talk generally about how like the passive recreation or conservation lands can be further expanded upon and more protection measures can be put in place for those.
Are we going to have any action items under objective 3?
There weren't any when we worked on this, but I think it possibly could, like we could definitely split up what we have already with like the different recreational options that were available, and then like splitting up, maybe creating a new one, just discussing like the expansion of like hiking areas and like passive recreational lands. I think you could make an argument for that.
Yeah, because it strikes me as a little bit odd that there is an objective with no action items that work towards achieving the objective. And granted that there is some overlap, and it's probably that it may be sufficient to sort of point to some other action items that are under other objectives that also relate to this one.
Yeah, sure.
Just something to think about. Just and not trying to solve it tonight, but just to point out that it looks odd for there to be an objective with no action items under it.
Yeah, I can make a note of that. All right, then we move on to objective 4, and this one is Gabe's.
Yes. So objective 4, expand the townwide system of trails to provide hiking, jogging, horseback riding, and biking options and increase usage of the trail network. And then there's several action items that support that. The first one is supporting the Trails Committee and Conservation Committee in addressing issues regarding the town's trails. So basically, given most towns have a pretty limited staff capacity, and there's going to be responsibility that'll fall on volunteer committees like Trails and Conservation. I think I talked to Elena a bit about this. I think this is definitely a section we could expand on. I didn't really have the background to talk about how else we could support the committee specifically. So if when we're reviewing the chapter, if anyone has ideas on how to expand this, that I think is one area where it could be beefed up a little. I don't know if that's about getting them funding or getting them more staff support or something like that, but I don't know what's on the table necessarily. Moving on, promote partnerships with local and regional clubs. I think what's really key for having a successful trail network is that you are in communication with the users of the trails, and there do seem to be a number of I call them trail user groups around the region. If there's any I'm missing, if there's any, I guess in Grafton that I'm missing, that would be good to know. I don't know if there's, I know some towns have like a hiking club or stuff like that, but that would be good to include. But I identified, for cycling, there's a lot: Mass Bike, Seven Hills Wheelman, New England Mountain Bike Association, Worcester County Women's Cycling. Hiking, the Appalachian Mountain Club seems to have a presence in central Massachusetts. Running, you have the Central Mass Striders Running Group. And then equestrian, I found this Org City to Saddle. I believe they're based in Rutland, but you could kind of use them in a, just because they're in Rutland, they would still have input. And I think setting up something like group activities, like hikes or like a casual bike ride with the trail user groups, you could would be cool to connect them with municipal staff and committee members. Moving on, develop a plan to ensure coordination between land trust, local clubs, and other agencies, organizations to make data on trails publicly available on the same platforms and the same formats. I think it's really important that if people are going to be using the trails, that they're easy to access on apps like Google Maps, Apple Maps, and then there's a variety of apps for hikers and bikers to plan out rides and hikes. So kind of cooperating with all the different landowners and getting accurate and updatable trail data out to those users. I think the big three would be, I think Google Maps, Apple Maps, and OpenStreetMaps tend to feed to the everything else. But getting that easily accessible, you want to create a really low friction experience for the trail user, so that they're not worried about how do I get around. They're worried about just getting to Grafton. And then on the same token, the next action item, ensure all coordinated trails data is made available to emergency services personnel. I think this goes hand in hand, and I think is probably the priority of getting good trails data. If you had to pick how to sell that, you want to make sure that emergency responders have access to accurate and updated trails data. God forbid there was some sort of incident or accident on a trail. You want to make sure that you're reducing response time and that it's not impossible for them to get in there. I know some towns really struggle. I know Princeton has had its issues with people having issues on Mount Wachusett, and I think making it so those issues are avoided as much as possible. Obviously, you're not looking at a mountain in Grafton, but making sure that everyone is able to be safe, I think, is a good goal. Moving on, develop a local and regional bike plan. So I think, like I've said before, Grafton is really well positioned in the region. And I think, so currently CMRPC did or CMMPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is part of CMRPC, did a bike plan in 2018. And currently there's transportation staff working on a new bike plan. So this is one of those action items that I think is it's already in the process. It's just about making sure it goes well for the town. But basically the last bike plan identified 24 separate potential bicycle corridors in Grafton, with a large number identified as a regional or major priority. And I think looking at, obviously, that we will be updating the bike plan and going to each town, but also looking at how to coordinate that with the trail network, and also incorporating just various road safety measures like speed bumps, rumble strips, lowered speed limits, and safer road design. That all plays into developing a good bike plan. And then work with CMRPC to collaborate with neighboring communities for bike path connections. Like I've mentioned, Grafton is really well positioned in the region to connect with Worcester, Millbury, Shrewsbury, and Westboro. And I think, especially as the regional bike plan is coming about, thinking about if we're going to put trails, is this going to be accessible from, say, it comes up on a border with a town? Will this be accessible to a road that's slated for bike lanes? Kind of considering the regional implications of any new trail infrastructure, I think can play out well. That's it, Sam.
I just
Okay.
wanted to add here, sorry, Sam.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that this recommendation for partnerships with local clubs, bike clubs, Gabe made this point earlier in the key findings. This is really critical if the town plans to leverage its assets for ecotourism. Having these organizations organize events in towns is a way to bring people to Grafton to spend money, ecotourism money, and kind of help that industry thrive. So these partnerships are really key. Gabe has worked on several ecotourism plans, and he's our expert in this area. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. And my impression is organizations like Mass Bike are always looking to, and I believe we definitely, our transportation side has connections with Mass Bike, but they're always looking to have events. And I think I don't know if they like have done anything in Grafton before, but I bet they'd be interested. We have 2 questions. Brian,
Yes,
had your
thank
hand
you
up
very
first.
much. Appreciate that. Question I have, these are great ideas. Who would be coordinating this? The recreation department? I'm just curious. There's a lot of ideas being thrown out here, which are great ideas, but who's going to take hold of them and work with them? Just curious how that would work.
Yeah, I think Sam could speak to that. He had an interview with the Parks and Rec Department. Indeed, they are very strained for resources and capacity. But we also want to be aspirational here. You know, if that capacity exists in the future, this is sort of the game plan for maximizing Grafton's opportunities. But Sam, maybe
Well, I
you can
mean,
details.
yeah. Throughout the different action items, I sort of talk about who could be playing a role in different things, but each action, like we're gonna have an implementation matrix for Grafton, right? So we'll have like these action items for all the different chapters are going to be put together into sort of a table that lists like the action item along with like who will be assigned the roles for each of them, and often they have like funding sources as well, and like other details about like how they could actually be implemented.
Yeah, that's going to be, yeah, and I know I've stressed this more than once during all of our discussions that by the time we're done with this, we will have an implementation plan, and every action item will be assigned to a specific agency, a board, a committee, a department, and there may be additional ones identified as also involved, but one agency or possibly an individual officer is going to have primary responsibility for every one of these action items. We don't, I mean, to the extent as we read through these now, there may be ideas about, who might be the logical, person or agency to be responsible, but I'm not expecting that to be nailed down until we, put together that implementation plan. That'll be a big part of the discussion of that implementation plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, Anne Marie?
Yeah, just 2 comments. One is that I appreciate the thought relative to the bike pathways and whatnot. So there is a large group. The email list that I'm on is about 100 people who do congregate in the center of town on Sundays for a ride, and folks come from all different towns, obviously, as far as West Boylston and whatnot. And even so much so that last week, they did go to local businesses as part of their ride. So I think that that's great. And just so that the committee knows and people from CMRPC know that there is in my estimation, a relatively large group. Again, I just looked up the email list that I'm on. It's 100 individuals that come here to ride. And so I think the idea of, this 24 potential bike corridors is fantastic. And then just kind of backing up a little bit, I think that just so you know, CMRPC folks, that the Trails Committee that we have is relatively new. I think it was only brought into effect maybe a year ago, if even that. And I know that they've been having some difficulty kind of gaining some traction. So any place in here that you can highlight, utilizing them. I know it's a committee that's eager to try to fit in and be accepted to help with some of this stuff. So I think, again, promoting collaboration with conservation, et cetera. So it's, again, relatively new committee that we have, but very eager bunch of folks. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there just for some historical information.
Chantel?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it fits, but I happen to be a member of a local hiking group And one of the things that we like to do is do the really long trails, but break them up into small pieces. So right now we're working on the New England Trail. A couple of years ago, we did the Mid-State Trail. We've done the Bay Circuit Trail. And the reason I mention it is just because in that piece about sort of like marketing our trail system and making Grafton kind of a hiking destination, some kind of a something connecting all the trails and like with the goal of hiking all of Grafton's trails. I didn't know if there's a way to integrate that suggestion or if it even makes sense in this context. I know another project we're working on is we've got a book of 50 beer hikes that pairs different hikes in New England with breweries. So anything like that, that sort of, I know it's in there about marketing, but maybe something that specifically connects the hiking to local businesses and or makes there some kind of like a cumulative goal of like hiking all of Grafton's trails or something along those lines.
Yeah, while the thought is in my mind, I just wanted to say that there may be a number of comments that people have on specific details in here. And for the committee members who are not able to meet with us tonight, I want to make sure that, we all have an opportunity to submit comments, through the same way we've been submitting comments for other chapters. I want to make sure that everybody is reminded that there is, in addition to what we discussed this evening, I don't want to get into some nitpicking things tonight. So those I will submit in writing, but just to make sure that, this is sort of the first time the committee is seeing this. So we'll want the committee to have an opportunity to provide plenty of feedback to you folks at CMRPC as you continue to work on this.
Thanks for that point, Dave. And Anne Marie and Chantel, if you could maybe submit the names of these organizations in the comments, I think we want to mention them as possible partners. So the
Okay.
organization in hiking.
I'll reach out to the gentleman. I don't know that there's an official name, and I wasn't going to say it, but Chantel, you brought it up. They did do their most recent ride was like a beer run, kind of all over Central Mass. Yeah, but I'll
Yeah.
ask him if there's a specific name. And if not, we could just generally say that there are active biking groups that meet in Grafton Center. But I'll reach out to him right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really a Facebook group. But I can still, it's not like an organized, I mean, it's a Facebook group, it's organized enough, but yeah, and a lot of Central Massachusetts people, so.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm wondering if the land trust would have any input in any of this as well, Dave, just to note, since we're trying to link trails together and so forth, they have a pretty good idea of what we've got going on, so that's just my comment.
Yeah, particularly when it comes to trails, the land trust is a very important part of Grafton's trail system.
And they have a
And I
very
know
robust
there are many
system.
places.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, they have a very robust system in terms of identifying the trails and having information online.
All right, moving on then.
Yeah, so goal 2 is specifically about providing more recreational opportunities at water features for residents to enjoy, as this was frequently described as a need by the residents. And so I talk a bit about how under the goal, I talk a bit about how the residents about how the water features play a big role in Grafton's history, and how this can sort of lay like a contextual or thematic foundation for future recreation, tourism, or community development opportunities. And then moving on from that, like going into the goal for this one, the goal is about preserving or protecting land around water features. So it's more of like a environmentally focused objective. But I sort of talk about how like the urbanization and sprawl over the years has sort of diminished the quality of like the ecological health of the town's water features, and how this is impacting their ability to be enjoyed for those recreational purposes. And then so between this and like the following recommendations, the following recommendations are focused on how the town can preserve the land, and protect the water features, and promote their use for recreational purposes. So action item 1.1 is more about the promotional focus, and it's talking about like how specifically you can improve signage for water features. And actually Gabe did some of the work on this one, and he also discussed like the branding and wayfinding plan. I don't know if you wanted to talk a bit about this one, Gabe.
Not, I mean, it's not that, basically I looked at the wayfinding plan and identified where it identified signage locations and kind of looked at where it was close to bodies of water and identified I think 5 or 6 different sign locations where we should be incorporating if we want to do better wayfinding for water. If there's signs going up, it could include that there.
For the second one, where we did this one talks about the importance of addressing the aquatic invasives, and talks about like the work the Conservation Commission plans to do to help address it. And then it gets into a discussion of how like there is a lot of water resource focused groups throughout the watershed that can be sort of brought to the table to help come up with strategies to address the issue of just not just invasives, but contaminants and water quality in general, to sort of, revitalize the water features in town and turn them into recreational resources. And that's it. Ta-da.
Thank you. Any
And you-
question
Yep,
from the group?
I just put my hand up quickly because it's Creeper Hill, not Creep, no big deal. Just a
Oh.
typo.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Yes, that was one of the nits that I was gonna submit as a written comment. Let's see, sort of as part of wrapping up the discussion on this, I will observe that this relates very closely to the open space and recreation plan that we did now 4 years ago. And in fact, a number of the action items in here pretty much are either direct copies or very closely related to action items in the open space and rec plan. And I think it's ultimately will be worth our while to sort of point out in this chapter of the master plan the relationship to the open space and rec plan. And in the cases where the same action items or substantially similar action items appear in both places, particularly when we get to the implementation stage here, we're going to want to make sure that we've got action items in sync for both implementations, and make sure that. And I'm not going to try to worry out all the details of that, but just to point out that there is, we have an open space and rec plan implementation in progress, and we will have the master plan implementation. And they both kind of proceed in parallel, so we want to make sure we've got those coordinated.
David, we actually had noted each one of them that came from the open space plan. It's my fault for removing those references, but what we plan to do is to overall state that this aligns pretty closely with the open space plan, and also include those references as footnotes. But Sam had marked
Yeah.
all of this prior, but thanks for flagging that.
Yeah, there's something I want to make sure that we've got that covered by the time we're all done with this.
Yes.
Okay, so anything else on open space and rec here? overall, I'd say I'm pretty pleased with this first draft. Fiona,
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Sorry for being late. Traffic and dinner and all sorts of things got in the way, but I made it. So I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the discussion. I just wanted to check Elena or Sam or CMRPC team, if you needed to, I know that there's some ongoing work with some mapping of trails that Concom is doing, and some efforts, that are underway. Did you get a chance to speak to the conservation agent or somebody in that office?
No, we only spoke with the Parks and Rec department, so great.
Okay.
We should definitely talk to them, especially since they have an active effort with the trail.
Yeah, and that's my fault. So I let me work on facilitating a meeting, maybe just like a quick 30-minute Zoom meeting to just go over some of this too and just get their thoughts on it.
Anne Marie.
Actually, so just based on that, Fiona, would it be appropriate for them not to also reach out to someone from Trails Committee? That wasn't my original question, but that's,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Elena or CMRPC team, have you spoken to anyone from Trails yet as well?
We have not, but
Okay.
it's a great idea. As we make edits to this chapter, we should talk to them.
Because I know that they've been moving forward in earnest, and they had a couple of things that were recently approved at town meeting and whatnot. So yeah, let me work on getting some meetings set up soon.
Thank you.
thanks, Fiona. And my actual question was relative to when you scroll up on the open space, the parcel acquisition, I just had a couple of questions like relative to the addresses, like I think 14 Snow Road, is that not like a development that maybe the addresses don't align? And then 53 Millbury, I thought that the town owned that already.
Oh, yeah,
So just-
that's the table, right? That's the table of the top 15 out of the parcel prioritization project. And yes, a number of those are not candidates for acquisition. In fact, if I want to be picky, I would say this isn't really, the project was not really focused on so much on acquisitions as prioritizing parcels that possibly could be considered, but in reality, several of these parcels are owned by the town already. They are not currently permanently protected. The Open Space and Rec Committee is actually looking at some of these as possibly to place them under control of conservation or some other means of permanent protection. But yeah, the top several of these, not all of them are ever going to be candidates for acquisition, either because they've already been acquired, they're already owned by the town, or there's, despite their high score, it doesn't make much sense. 188.
Yeah, so that was
another
my point. If I could just complete it, was simply that a number of these are either already owned by the town and or other entities. And when it says the top 15 priorities for acquisition, we just might have to clean that up a little bit. Like I said, Snow Road, Millbury, Pleasant, Follette Street, just kind of going through it quickly. So that's all. Thank you.
Actually,
Yeah,
now that I
and
think about
that
it,
was going
like,
to be one of my comments.
do we even want to have something like that within this chapter? Like a top 15 priorities for protection or acquisition? Or do you think it would make sense to not include that because it would be sort of like, we don't want to offend private landowners that you haven't had any discussion with, you know?
Yeah, I would give some consideration to not including the list.
Sure,
And
sure. Yeah.
describing the project in general, yes, but yeah, maybe the list doesn't need to be published in here. Not
Yeah, that
like the
makes sense.
list is private privileged information. It's available on the town website. But
Okay.
we do want to, and like I said before, I was going to be submitting a written comment about this particular topic in this table.
Okay.
I will follow up with some suggestions for how I think it might be described.
Sure.
Okay, anything else on open space and rec? If not, we can move on to economic development.
I think that's my cue. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Hollinger. I'm a planner with CMRPC. First time here with you all, so it's good to meet you all. I'm also here joining me is Joe, who's one of our economic development planners at CMRPC too. So we'll kind of do a similar thing, and we'll run through the key findings and then the goals, objectives, and action items. Is it Sarah? Do you have control over?
Yes.
Great.
And
All
just
right, so-
sort of at the outset, again, kind of, I'm sure we can take, comments from the members of the committee during the presentation, but as with the open space, a lot of detailed comments, and of which I will have quite a fair number of them. I'm not going to bring them up tonight, but I will submit them in writing, and I hope everybody else does the same. But sort of comments you want to make during the presentation that may be important for the committee to hear or talk about. Yeah, I think don't hesitate. Hopefully not to interrupt Jordan too much, but
no, I like being interrupted, so feel free to just yell or raise your hand. I can kind of see people, so I'll try to be cognizant of anybody that raises their hand if you would prefer that option. So yeah, thanks for that, David.
Okay. Also, thanks everybody, but I have to run. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
well, thanks, Sam.
Have a good night.
All right. So we have sort of 5 key findings for the economic development chapter that came out of some really great notes. I think that some of the committee members helped put together, along with a lot of the materials that came out of kind of public workshop settings and surveys and that sort of thing. So the first one is about the property tax burden, and that falling largely on residential property owners in the town, and looking at the opportunity to distribute that burden more broadly across potentially new businesses, new commercial industrial development in town. This is something we see in a lot of towns kind of throughout the region, is that the property tax burden in the town largely falls on residences. And so you can see that in the graph that we have on this page. It's kind of hovered over the last 20 or so years, kind of in the 90% range. There's also, can you scroll down, Sarah, a little bit? And so we looked a little bit at kind of what we're seeing in terms of housing unit growth. I assume this was also covered in the housing chapter as well, but just kind of juxtaposing kind of the employment growth, or at least the growth in employment establishments, trying to get at like the new businesses or new development that's coming in, and looking at kind of what that looks like in terms of residential versus commercial. And, probably no surprise, but housing development has seen kind of a nominally larger increase, but the relative percentage increase, as you can see in this, for employment establishments has not been insignificant over the last 10 years or so either. And so we talk a little bit about kind of the benefits of economic and tax-based diversification in this key finding. And Sarah, if you can scroll down a little bit further, kind of giving some sense of the type of development, and some of which you already have in the town, that can really help to kind of alleviate, not fully, but kind of distribute that tax burden, or make that tax burden a little bit more efficient in terms of the development that you're seeing in the town. And so I think I'd even seen maybe a version of this that maybe, David, it might have been one that you put together that was kind of a similar analysis, looking at tax value per acre. Is that right?
Yes, I made a picture very much like that. The key difference in mine, I expressed the results in terms of property tax revenue per acre rather than assessed value. To my mind, okay, property tax revenue per acre is a little bit more relatable to the people reading it, because assessed values and tax rates sort of interact. Right? 'Cause if you were to do a comparison over time, which we're not doing here, and I don't recommend, that a property tax revenue per acre is more consistent from year to year and probably more understandable to the reader here.
Okay, and so maybe swapping that out for that, maybe that would be your preference to have that analysis in here instead of this one.
Yeah, I mean, the picture looks identical. It's just the numbers instead of assessed
Right.
value, it's tax revenue.
Yeah, and so
Otherwise, the picture's identical.
yeah, and the idea here is really trying to get at that kind of the more traditional New England town development, which is a little bit, you know, homes on smaller lots, kind of horizontal and vertical mixed use development, a little bit denser than what you've seen over the last 50 years, tends to be a little bit more efficient in terms of tax revenue generated relative to the infrastructure and service provision to those areas. So just some considerations there. Want to move on to key finding 2, Sarah? And so it was pretty clear from looking through the notes and survey respondents that there's definitely an appetite in the town to support small local businesses. So that's kind of a key economic development strategy that we tried to latch on to throughout the chapter. Not everybody, of course, is in favor of seeing additional commercial development in town, but this was one of the areas where there was kind of overwhelming support in what had been collected from the community. There were some we did look through the town's business survey that was done, I believe, last year, and pulled out some kind of themes from that in terms of where the town can maybe work to strengthen some of the business relationships that it has specifically with some of the smaller businesses. We didn't see a lot of like really negative experiences working with the town, but certainly some opportunities to improve that relationship, like maybe advertising assistance. Certain the financial incentives came up. Always nice to have those as a business owner, obviously. And then some comments related to permitting processes and working with town departments and just trying to continually work to make that a smooth process for small businesses. Key finding number 3 is really about the town's kind of locational advantages. You're in a really good location in terms of some key transportation corridors. Having a train station is a really big asset, kind of proximity to Worcester and that labor force is a big asset. And then, you know, within the town, having a really well-educated workforce, you have a really high percentage of your residents that have a bachelor's degree or higher. And so kind of all of these things kind of combining to create an environment that I'm sure you've seen has made Grafton a really regionally competitive place. And so continuing to kind of latch on to that is something that we touched on in some of the goals and objectives as well. Key finding 4 tries to go a little bit into some of the current market dynamics, particularly around commercial development, housing development. And so there were some comments, and I think this was actually a theme that maybe came out in the 2001 master plan too, about kind of limited land availability that has utility infrastructure supporting it. And so I think this also came up during the review of the land use chapter, but we've been kind of working separately on a build out analysis that has included Grafton. And certainly we've seen that, you know, developable commercial land has declined in the town over the last 20 years. There is still land available for development, but maybe some suggestions that may start to become a constraining factor in the future. We also touched here on housing costs and kind of our statewide housing shortage and just considering how that might start to play into some of the town's economic development and the ability for workers to live and work in the town, and what does it mean if, you know, lower wage workers are continually priced out and have to commute long ways, and so just some considerations there. And then I think the other thing we touched on here was just about kind of the preference that we're seeing for residential development over commercial development right now. And so pulling in some sources that kind of prominent sources like JP Morgan, I think, puts out a report that looks at trends in commercial development and, you know, some of the typical tensions that developers have seen in terms of inflation and uncertainty around things like retail playing a role in what we're seeing in towns. Key finding 5. This one is trying to get at what we were seeing in terms of I'll call it a tension, but kind of this trade-off between seeing more economic development and physical development of spaces and the preservation of open space, which we just talked about. And so looking at it as though there's an opportunity to really leverage those existing areas of kind of the town's existing commercial corridors and centers of activity, to consider things like infill or maybe additional development or redevelopment opportunities, kind of with that lens in mind. So those were the key findings. Anyone want to talk about those or offer any comments? If not, we can run into the goals. Fiona?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Really great summary here. And great encapsulation of the issues. I mean, this is really more 2 comments that I have. I mean, firstly, housing is economic development in a lot of ways. And I think we're kind of seeing that with like the market trends and the primary types of development that we're seeing in housing, and how we can use those trends to kind of bolster our more commercial areas. You know, I think another thing to just kind of touch on, and I struggle with the size of our current industrial and commercial districts. I mean, I don't know if Dave probably knows off the top of his head, but I mean, the percentage compared to the total land area in town is so minimal. It's interesting to see some of those survey responses saying that, you know, the commercial districts in town are already too vast or what have you. So it really more of a comment. But, you know, I think all things considered, and I don't know if it's compared to other Central Mass communities, if our commercial areas are bigger or smaller, I would be kind of interested to see some of that comparative data, just so the reader will get an understanding of where Grafton is compared to, you know, maybe like Millbury, Westboro, you know, those types of towns. So just 2 comments. Thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah, sure. So the idea there being maybe it would be valuable to just kind of have a high level look at like the amount of land that is currently used for industrial, commercial uses, and just look at how that compares to kind of surrounding towns. And maybe that'll give people a lens for what they're experiencing on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize it. I think that it's always helpful for, especially, you know, the regular Grafton resident. I feel like it's a natural inclination is to think, oh, well, what are our neighbors doing, or what do our neighbors look like, or like
Sure.
regionally, what are the trends? So just maybe some comparison data would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah,
that point.
I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, but I know I've got written down somewhere calculations of you know, how many acres and what percentage of our town is zoned for the various commercial uses. It would be interesting to compare both the land that's zoned for commercial use and the acreage that's actually in commercial use, because the 2 are not the same. You know,
Right.
you've got a lot of residential use in a commercial zone. You've got some commercial use in a residential zone. One of the figures here was showing the vacant commercial land. Just as kind of a side comment, that needs to be updated because, yeah, but if you look at the top, the blue and purple area, the big blue and purple areas at the top, those are basically all entirely spoken for now. They're no longer developable. They're either under development, the big blue spot combined with a big purple spot is currently about to receive a permit for a big commercial development. Some of the other spots, I mean, the MBTA parcel is shown there in blue, and it's obviously occupied by the train station. Got some other projects. One of those, I don't want to, I didn't want to get into a lot of gory detail here, but something to say that an updated version of that map that reflects the current situation, eventually we'll want that included. I'd be happy to work with Fiona and you guys on making sure that's up to date. The point of this map is to show how relatively little developable commercial land we have in town. And in fact, if you take out the parts that are no longer potentially developable, there's not much left in Grafton of commercial land that could be developed.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I actually had a note to specifically ask about this because I suspected that was the case. And so there's always like a little bit of lag between what happens on the ground and what the state gets in terms of like the statewide assessor data that you can download. And so when I made this, just kind of using the use codes, I was like, I don't think this is quite right. So thank you for that. Yes, would love to work with you on
It's a starting point, and just as a side comment, I was doing some other analysis a while back where I was trying to identify unused parcels, and the use codes aren't the best by themselves, are not the best thing to use without supplementary data.
Yeah.
Anne Marie, you had your hand up.
Want to talk to the assessor for up to date. We've run into this problem with other communities where the use codes are outdated by the time we release the plan. But I think what would be useful here is to look at trends over time, especially since one of the points made by this working group several times was how housing is encroaching on commercial land. This is definitely a trend that we've seen in other communities, but unlike Grafton, in other communities such as Leicester, commercial space is underutilized. So that may actually be a beneficial thing, but that's not the case in Grafton. So we'll try to get update some of this data, but we've been in conversation with the assessor as well for the land use. So maybe we'll join forces with our land use chapter.
And the thing about something like this is it's always a snapshot of a point in time. Something could change next week, and once a document is put together, elements like this are going to become out of date.
Right.
And that's just it can't be any other way.
Anne Marie, I saw you had your hand up for a second.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm okay. I think I was going to comment that just trying to look at this from, a bigger overview. But that it's fine. We're good.
Elena, I think Bob was physically raising his hand as well. Bob, I think you're muted.
I can't.
Yeah, sorry, Bob, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I can't hear. Sorry about that. All right. Well, let's jump into the goals here. Oh, something happened with that chart. Okay, so actually, I think our colleague Mike Mullen Brown, who you've all met from the land use chapter. There was quite a bit of overlap here, I think, in terms of some of the objectives and kind of overlap with some of the stuff that was put in the land use chapter. So he graciously agreed to work on this one with us, but I'll give you an overview. So goal 1 is continue to work toward a long-range economic development strategy that charts a strategic direction for development, leverages Grafton's unique advantages, and increases regional competitiveness. And so in the key findings, we already sort of highlighted what some of those key strengths are, why Grafton has become already fairly regionally competitive and is seeing investment in things like life sciences and that sort of thing, or the potential for that to come in the future. And so we start out this goal looking at some high level data points, just kind of about the labor force in Grafton's and the growth in the labor force. And so we've seen kind of over the last 10 years, along with population growth that is translated into a larger civilian labor force, relatively stable levels of unemployment over the last 10 years. If you scroll down, Sarah, in terms of where residents are employed, we've seen growth. Sorry, back up. Thanks. Yeah, figure 12. Some significant growth in where I think that, again, this is just a translation of the civilian labor force and where those new residents are working. Fewer workers in things like wholesale trade, information, finance, insurance, and real estate over the last 10 years or so. You can go down. One of the interesting things is that where Grafton residents are employed kind of reflects very closely what Worcester County and the state overall looks like. So you can kind of see that in the shape of the curves here, or in the shape of the data here. Again, highly educated town, over 50% of the workforce, over 50% of residents have a bachelor's degree or higher. A relatively small share of residents work and live in Grafton. It's about 19, I think it's 19.3%, which is not too dissimilar from some of the surrounding towns, but much smaller percentage of the workforce than what you would see in somewhere like Worcester. Fairly strong, and you can scroll down, keep scrolling. Strong, relatively strong business sector representation in the town. And so Mike pulled doing business as certificates, 223 of those in the town. And so that's kind of the high level overview of the data points that we included here, as well as largest employers in the town. And so that moves into objective 1.1, which is build on the EDC's, or the Economic Development Commission's, current efforts to pursue generative large-scale investments in Grafton's industrial and technology parks to create stronger economic opportunities. And so we sort of touched on here that the town has already done quite a lot to encourage and foster industrial and sort of that high-tech development. And so this is really a kind of a continuation of those efforts. And so the action items under this are kind of that stepped process to kind of continue down this path. So the first action item is to look at carrying out a feasibility study for the creation of an innovation hub to create a critical mass of resources for the life sciences industry by continuing to leverage Grafton's locational advantage and its relationships with higher education institutions. So our understanding of this was kind of more of maybe like an economic feasibility study that's looking at, where are we seeing high demand for different types of high-tech manufacturing or life sciences, that sort of thing. Action item 2 then goes into a development parcel prioritization, which is kind of looking more on the ground. Where is there land available to do this type of thing? What are the constraints to seeing that type of development happen in Grafton, and how can we overcome that? And then the last action item 2, which is really the connection to the land use chapter, is to include those considerations when pursuing something like a zoning diagnostic and thinking about how the town's zoning bylaw can be updated to encourage these types of developments. Moving into objective 2, under goal 1, so this was kind of a completely different area that the town is interested in focusing on, which is supporting local farms, ecotourism, nature attractions. And so this is very closely related to the conversation around kind of the open space and recreation stuff too. Agritourism as well being a big part of that. And so the action items here is to try to incorporate that focus on ecotourism or agritourism in the agricultural commission's kind of function. I think there's a term for kind of the guiding document for the agricultural commission, so actually kind of solidifying that focus within that document. And then action item 2 under that objective is to attract and encourage hospitality industry establishment. So again, I think this is kind of bringing it back to maybe a zoning diagnostic and thinking about where would you want to see these types of businesses, where would they be advantageous in terms of agritourism, ecotourism, and how are we either facilitating that in our zoning bylaws, or where do we have barriers to that type of thing? And so in the actual text, you can see that there's some reference to what was included in the land use chapter there. And so that is it in terms of goal 1. I don't know if we want to stop there and talk about any of that, or we can, I can pass it over to Joe to jump into goal 2.
Any questions for Jordan at this point? Seeing none, let's move ahead.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Joe Zabowski. I think this is the first time I'm meeting you all, so it's a pleasure to be here. So I'll be talking about goal 2 of the economic development chapter. And my apologies here. I think that retaining and attracting businesses that contribute to diversifying Grafton's tax base and increasing employment opportunities. As we touched on earlier, Grafton has a lot of natural advantages when it comes to attracting businesses and commercial development. Its location, its skilled and educated labor force. But this chapter kind of focuses on leveraging some of those more more of those qualitative assets that the town, qualitative and policy-based assets that the town can use to leverage to attract businesses. So the first objective here is to build town capacity to recruit, retain, and market local businesses. So the town has several assets in this regard. An active economic development commission. From what I understand, they're kind of getting on their feet again and finding a direction in the aftermath of the departure of the economic development specialist position. But having an active EDC is an asset in itself. A lot of communities can't say that much. And Grafton's also fortunate to be served by a number of chambers of commerce. So it's important to try to leverage those assets for the town's economic development. Moving on to action item 2.11 is an enhanced communication with the town and local businesses. I think as we touched on earlier in the business survey that was conducted at the end of 2023 and early 2024, the town generally received high marks for its relationship working with businesses to set up and maintain their business. But there was some mentions of frustration around working with certain town departments and and particularly frustration around the permitting process. And some of that might just be perceptions and individual experiences. So to try to ameliorate those frustrations from some individuals, the town could try to better communicate policy and develop more understanding in the business community in that area. So some ways to do that could be documents that range from, pages for permitting, your developer or your property developer or, industrial tenants aren't likely to need a permanent guide to shepherd them through the process, but they can be helpful for small property owners and smaller businesses. Another option could be a newsletter that's more broad encompassing than the recreation focused newsletter that the recreation department disseminates. And then the town could also consider hosting an annual or regularly occurring business forum to provide a forum for business owners to interact with municipal staff and which is important because, I think not everyone in the community always realize all the important work and initiatives the town is working on. So it's an opportunity to introduce community stakeholders to the work the town is doing, and also an opportunity to hear from business stakeholders and clear up any misunderstandings that might be occurring there. If we could move to the next action item. Action item 1.2 is hosting events to promote local business activity, facilitate business-to-business networking. Obviously, the town cannot directly market or promote on behalf of businesses, but it can provide a venue for businesses to network and gain publicity in the community. And so one way to do that is through events. The Grafton Recreation Department already holds a number of community events, many of which take place on the town common. But there may possibly be additional opportunities for businesses to be involved in those events beyond sponsorship opportunities that already exist. And then I know the Economic Development Commission has hosted some events in recent years, one of which was at the beginning of this year, a business networking event, but trying to host events like that on a more regular basis to increase turnout could be valuable. Can move to the next goal. Action item 2.13 is for further developing the town's business retail marketing page. Again, Grafton's ahead of many communities in this area. Most communities don't have a marketing page that's very detailed, but there's some, I guess what I'll say is the town could perhaps spruce up the marketing page to make it more attractive and enticing to prospective businesses and developers, turn it into something that is a marketing asset on behalf of the town, something you could share with prospective businesses and developers. To enhance the marketing page could be adding more visual and graphic elements to it. So I provided a link there to a website from the Hudson Downtown Business Improvement District. Framingham's Economic and Community Development Department also has a pretty detailed website called Choose Framingham that delves into all the different facets of living in Framingham, everything from working, living, playing, and learning. So kind of taking a comprehensive approach to economic development. There's also some communities that have an interactive map of businesses in the community and properties that are available, or tenant opportunities in the community. And CMRPC, and I'm sure other consultants as well, also can make these platforms or resources called story maps, which are kind of like an interactive website, if you want to think of it that way. But that can be a an interactive and more aesthetically pleasing way to kind of present Grafton's economic development story. So those are some options to consider. If we can scroll on. The next action item is strengthening town's relationship with its regional chambers of commerce. As I mentioned, Grafton is served by 3 chambers of commerce, technically. The Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, I guess, has a large service area. But more specifically, there's the Quarter 9/495 Regional Metro West Chamber of Metro West. And additionally, the Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'm still looking to engage with the Quarter 9 Chamber about their experience collaborating with the town. But I had heard from the BVCC that, that they had a stronger relationship with the town prior to the pandemic, which is understandable. I mean, the pandemic disrupted a lot of things. But trying to rekindle that relationship is really important, because the chambers have a lot to offer the local business community and can be a valuable partner to the town as well when it comes to promoting events, attracting new businesses to relocate to town, et cetera, et cetera. Next action item is stimulating private investment by offering tax exemptions. So there's a couple, by tax exemptions, there's a couple of tax exemptions municipalities can offer through the Economic Development Incentive Program. That's overseen by the EAC, which is a Economic Advisory. I actually don't know what that stands for off the top of my head, but it's a council of the state that approves tax exemptions for businesses. So that tax exemption is either on the full fair cash value of a property or the incremental increase in property value from incentivized development. So that's usually these tax exemptions are temporary. So it's a way to incentivize new development in the community and to incentivize businesses to relocate to the community. And then once that temporary tax exemption lapses, the town taxes the full fair cash value of the property, improvements included if they've been made. All right,
Yeah,
and then
maybe worth
is there
pointing
any
out
comments
Grafton
before
has
we?
done some tips. Sorry. Yeah, it may be worth pointing out that Grafton has in fact used TIFs a number of times. One of our current soon to have a shovel in the ground developments has a TIF that was granted to them. And we've done a number of TIFs in the past, so we have leveraged that incentive in the past. But still, for this chapter, it's worth, as you did, explaining what the TIF is. Yeah, and you might mention that Grafton has taken advantage of TIF programs in the past.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be sure to include that. I checked the state's website on TIF announcements. I'm not sure if that included special tax assessments though, but I'll definitely touch base with you or Fiona on to get those examples, because if we can use an example from Grafton, that'd be better than using an example from another community. So definitely.
Looks like Anne Marie has a question too.
Thanks. I just wanted to note that we also have a TIF committee.
Okay. Definitely make note of that. Thank you.
Yep.
Is there any other comments? Sorry, I only see people at the top of the screen, so I can't see if any.
Not seeing any other comments, so move on.
Scroll down. Thank you. So yeah, objective 2 is kind of focused on encouraging small scale business investment, as we touched on before. Obviously, large employers are great for a community, but that does introduce an element of risk. You know, if industries to promote smaller
it-
scale
Yeah,
business
let's
development.
breaking up occasionally, maybe turning off the video might help. I don't know if anyone
Oh.
else is experiencing that. I might be on my end.
I'm
Oh,
hearing
I
that
noticed
too.
that too.
Same here, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Office Wi-Fi. All right, let me know if I break up again at any point. Be sure to restart my talking point. So where did I leave off? Should I start again at objective 2?
Yeah, you were starting to talk about objective 2 here.
Okay. Yep. So I was just explaining how objective 2 is it focuses on promoting small scale business development in the community. Obviously, large scale employers are very valuable to communities, both as a tax base and a source of employment. But depending on fluctuations and industry trends, that can introduce an element of risk, whereas small scale economic development traditionally can be more stable over time, more diversification. So that's what this objective aims to talk about. Scroll down, Sarah, please. So action item 2.21 talks about a retail needs assessment. So a retail needs assessment is both a quantitative and qualitative look at what opportunities there might be in the local market for new retail and service businesses. So there's multiple approaches on how this could be done, but just, well, actually, I guess the image is out of view right now, but one example is comparing actual sales to potential sales in a trade area that you would draw. So this is just a way for the town to identify those retail and service businesses that are more likely to be successful in the community, as opposed to businesses where there might not be a niche, as things currently stand. And then if we could scroll down to Fiona, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious about, I mean, I think we can all assume that there's a significant amount of retail leakage going on because Grafton doesn't have. I guess I'm curious about how far we can take that previous action item, given how little the commercial base is. I'm wondering if maybe the working group would be interested in rewording it, or I mean, obviously, if the group wants to pursue it, then that's totally fine too. I'm just thinking if we're trying to do an analysis of where the gaps are in retail, I think there's going to be a lot of findings that there's for almost every and all type of product that a Grafton resident would like to purchase. We do have a grocery store, but comparatively speaking, I think, and this is just like anecdotal data that I've gathered from talking to people, is 9 out of 10 times they're going to the neighboring communities to do grocery shopping or clothes shopping or what have you. So it's just, I guess it's really more of a comment, more than anything. Because I guess, yeah, I think we would need a little bit of a bigger base to pursue this. But
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate the comment, and they're definitely, so the way this usually works is you'll identify several categories of business activity, NAICS categories, as the acronym goes, and look at each category to see whether there's quote unquote what's called leakage. You know, because you would calculate what you would assume the local populace would spend on a business category, and then based on, you know, per capita spending in the US and then some other metrics, and then you compare that to actual sales in the community based on economic census data or other data. So for some categories, yeah, I mean, the results probably wouldn't be too surprising. But and so I mean, obviously I would defer to you all on whether this would be useful or not to you. But usually, so you can drop like a regional trade area, and it can sometimes be interesting to look at, you know, what communities in the region are dominating what business categories, for example, and where the town might want to try to compete, right? So I know we can get into a lot of detail in it on it here, but again, yeah, I'll definitely, I mean, it's definitely defer to you all on whether you think this would be useful or valuable.
Hey, Joe, just I think you were hinting at it a little bit, but isn't one of the values of doing that is like you're not just looking at gaps in the town specifically, like you're treating the area more broadly and looking at it, so you can get a sense of like, okay, we maybe don't have a second grocery store, but given what is within our kind of quote service area, however that's defined, we wouldn't expect that to be to have high enough demand for that in the town. So it can be a little bit, even though, you know, maybe on the ground people are saying like, yeah, I'd love to have a second grocery store. It can kind of give you a sense of like, you know, kind of not super regionally, but kind of within a more targeted like trade area, what there is potential for. And it might not be quite as obvious as what you would assume given that slightly larger geographic area. Joe, does that sound
Yeah, no, I
accurate?
definitely agree with what you said. So yeah, it is. So you drop a trade area, and you know, depending on the business category, that could be smaller or larger, right? Because people go different distances for different types of businesses. But it can be an insightful look into, you know, if there's leakage in your community, you might find that, you know, another neighboring community has a strength there, in whatever category it is. So as Jordan said, it might not give you, it's not intended to give you all the answers. It's supposed to be supplemented by, you know, community input and qualitative feedback from the community. But it may highlight some opportunities that exist in the local economy, or highlight business areas where it's unlikely to be there. It's unlikely that there is further opportunities.
Looks like David has a question.
Yeah, so my question on this would be, what do we do with it? How would we use this to foster the business development within Grafton? Would this be information that we would provide to potential businesses that are considering locating in Grafton? Would we use this to guide some, you know, policy decisions such as, you know, zoning to encourage particular types of businesses or other forms of incentives? I mean, gathering the information, it's kind of an interesting, just an exercise in understanding, you know, the potential gaps in available retail services. But we would want to be able to talk about how Grafton could use this information to improve the you know, the delivery of business, retail, you know, business and services to our citizens. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't want to dwell on it here, but you know, I think that's something to think about. What we would do
Yeah,
with
no, I
this.
mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on a lot of the potential uses of that data. as a way to entice businesses to relocate to the community. And also as data for the town to use to introspect on, you know, what uses do we allow in the town, and might there be further opportunities, you know, to increasingly allow certain uses, except stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that is what we see as the value in it. And you know, you might find in a certain business category that Grafton has a surplus. You know, the actual sales are higher than potential sales, and for a certain business, that might be a sign of strength in the local economy, that Grafton has a niche in this particular business category. So stuff like that.
Yeah, so we probably want to mention in the description of this action item what Grafton would be doing with the data that it gathers.
Sure, yeah, we can definitely add that in. All right, and then the last action item we had here for this objective is facilitate new business startups by offering business assistance grants, perhaps unsurprisingly. This was something that came up at workshops. So this action item touches on some potential ways Grafton might go about that. So there's something called the Massachusetts Vacant Storefront Program that several of Grafton's neighbors take advantage of. That could be one avenue. You know, seeing as though, you know, the town can't generally speaking, you know, provide money to private businesses. You know, it also mentions taking advantage of opportunities to use eligible federal dollars for that, although I obviously realize that those funds are much more scarce in the aftermath of the pandemic. But yeah, that is the point of this action item. And at the end, it also touches on making sure local businesses are aware of other grant and loan opportunities offered by Massachusetts Executive Office of Economic Development agencies, and some other resources as well.
And, you know, I think in the interest of time, I want to be mindful of everyone's time and the meeting time here. Maybe in goal 3, we can select just the most important, or the ones that you think are critical.
In terms of, sorry, Elena, in terms of the objective action items.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
terms of-
I think there aren't a ton of them, so I think I can run through them really quickly. Essentially, this goal is all about trying to bring additional economic opportunity to areas in South Grafton. So I guess our understanding of that was that it's historically been seen less economic development. It's an area of town that has traditionally been lower income. And so the first objective under this goal is to create more vibrant, sustainable commercial corridors. And so we just kind of listed out some ways in which, or some elements of vibrant corridors. So thinking about mixed use development, I know several of these things the town is already doing. And so again, this would be a continuation of that. You know, mixed use development is already permitted in the area. Multimodal infrastructure. I know that the town has invested in new sidewalk infrastructure to connect kind of the South Grafton area to the Mill Village Park. Thinking about public spaces and placemaking, again, places like parks where you can hold events. Supporting directly, again, this is a theme that I think Joe touched on too, but finding ways to support the small business community in South Grafton as well. And so the first action item here is to create a corridor stakeholder action committee. And so thinking about groups, a group of maybe business owners or property owners that can kind of understand the local needs and be that kind of connection to the town in terms of facilitating the type of economic development that you want to see. Next action item, work with the Economic Development Commission to create a diverse retail mix. This is, I guess our understanding was that this is kind of that relationship building and maybe using some of those other analyses when maybe there's a better understanding of the types of businesses that might be successful in actually reaching out to them and building those relationships and saying, being proactive and identifying potential sites, which goes into the next action item, which is undertaking an analysis of parcels, looking at things like building to land ratios, or I think I'm more familiar with it being called a land to asset ratio, where you're thinking about whether land is kind of underdeveloped given local demand. And so that's a look at kind of how much of the land is physically used, or how much of the land's value is derived from the land versus the building or the asset that's located on it. And so incorporating some of that analysis into some of those considerations. And then the last couple pieces here are about aesthetic improvements. And so I think I'll leave it there. This is thinking about things like public art and wayfinding, which I know the town is being proactive on, so continuing to do those things. So I think that's it from us. Sorry, that was a long one.
Any questions from anybody? If not, I do have one picture I would like to show. It's relative, turns out to be relative to this, if I can find it. There. So this is something that I started looking at this and thinking about housing development in village centers. And what I did was I tried to identify what to me looked like village centers, basically a cluster of small, neighborhood type businesses with adjacent housing that's generally on a units per acre measure. It's more dense than in the larger part of town. And to me, I see these 8 different areas that kind of each one of them looks like a compact village center with some small businesses surrounded by residences. On this picture at the bottom, I basically, we often think of that as just South Grafton, but there is the 3 mill villages, each kind of fall into 3 separate groups of varying types, and they all look a little different too. Then there's going up there is of course Grafton Center, and again, to me, the what, for lack of a better term, I'll call the central business district is sort of the bigger businesses along Worcester Street, which it's predominantly business, but they're anchored at both ends by the Grafton Housing Authority, and on the Lake Ripple side, the Comfort Point, which is an older development of smaller houses. So that's sort of, it's a little bit larger, but it's still a business district surrounded by housing. There's of course North Grafton, which kind of separates into the New England Village area. That's sort of the traditional name for it, along North Main Street. Over on Worcester Street towards the Millbury line, you've got another. They're not quite connected together, which is why I kind of drew them separately. Again, you've got a cluster of businesses with a lot, the Hollywood Gardens on the north side and the Airport Road neighborhood on the other side. Finally, there is the Transit Village, which really doesn't entirely exist yet as an identifiable village, but it's been a goal of ours to create that. We've got some approved but not yet built mixed use going on. There are a few existing businesses, but to avoid belaboring the point, to me, trying to focus on sort of clusters of somewhat similar businesses separated from one another and surrounded by housing. Like I said, I started out saying I started out looking at this in terms of housing, in denser housing in village centers, but I realized this fits equally well with what we've just been talking about for like revitalizing South Grafton and really focusing on what we can do for the businesses in these areas. Very much aligned with what I was but I was kind of thinking as I developed this, that you want to take a closer look at each of these areas, identify the opportunities for building, rebuilding the businesses and housing. So I'll just leave it here for now for us to think about, because it's a little bit finer grained look at the particularly the smaller village center or commercial centers type of thing that may be useful as to focus where we look and study in different areas.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Thanks for sharing.
So, any other? I should mention just in passing that our commercial, our neighborhood business, community business, mixed use, and 40R zoning aligns fairly closely, but not 100% with these. But I do have another map that shows how these areas match up with the zoning. I should, if nothing else, we'll share this with everybody. I think I sent that to you, Fiona, but we haven't shared it more widely yet. But to the extent that that might be helpful in focusing some of our work, take it for whatever it's worth.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, and I guess last comment here, just I don't know if I can stress this enough, but reiterating how our current business and industrial base is quite limited, and a lot of the structures that exist in those districts currently are actually not dedicated to a commercial or industrial use. So just something to consider as we try and examine and bolster and refine our action items there. Like Grafton is predominantly residential, and I have personally talked to business owners that are interested, and I have been told, village mixed use zoning that can kind of combine the traditional village structure that Grafton has historically been used to, especially that New England village character. But yeah, I think that's just something to consider. Grafton is, I don't know if they're totally unique in this way, but we do have a lot of, residential that's in our existing commercial industrial areas. So how we can work around or work with that rather is something that we can examine further.
Yeah, that kind of gets to, one of my thoughts is it's easy enough to think in the abstract about mixed use, and we've all seen plenty of pictures of mixed use, sketches of mixed use, photographs of mixed use in other towns, but we need to be able to focus on where in Grafton we want to think about doing this, and what's there and how what's there can evolve to whatever vision we want. We may find that some areas really work, and some areas really there aren't the opportunities we'd like to see. But that's why I appreciate it in the draft of the economic development toward the end there. You're talking about an evaluation of different parcels, looking for what are the opportunities for new development or redevelopment or expansion, buildings that may need to be modernized or even replaced. But you want to know, you got to know what's there in order to understand how you can evolve that to where you'd like to go.
Yeah, and I guess one other last comment, sorry, one more. Just the effects of infrastructure on this type of development. I mean, Grafton is a limited sewer infrastructure, and that really dictates where this development will go. So I think that's just something that we should highlight as well. I know that there's, minimal there's interest in expanding incrementally in areas that make sense. But if we're going to be examining kind of targeted areas of density and more like infill type style, yeah, that infrastructure water, sewer, the kind of basic is absolutely necessary. Business owners want to see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we, we wrap this up for now? Our next meeting would be December 2nd, first Monday. I don't remember if we've talked about that December meeting. I know we had a problem scheduling October and November meetings.
Yeah, Dave, November and October were challenging with all of the Mondays that were holidays. So December, I think we're kind of, at least, the first Monday, we won't have any issues there. So back to kind of the regular schedule.
Good.
Yeah.
And we want,
And again-
we want to,
Again, I just want to, I want to make sure that we send out to all of the working group members a request that they provide comments on the open space and the economic development chapters. Presumably add them to the comments workbook on the website or on the Dropbox, I should say.
Yes.
I would like to, particularly since a lot of the committee group wasn't able to be here tonight, I'd like to make sure that everybody's encouraged to provide their feedback on the chapters we've just discussed. Anne Marie?
Yeah, thanks. So were the comments from this evening captured by the group from CMRPC? In other words, do I not have to email those in?
We captured most of them, but
Thank you.
missed some. I think I got all of them and I wrote them in the drafts.
Okay,
It
thanks.
always be useful to have a backup, but if you
Yeah.
you got most-
Unfortunately, the interfacing with this whole thing online doesn't work out. And then additionally, I just wondered if I know at least one member, I don't believe has been to any of our meetings, like given that we had an issue this evening with quorum, would it be worth looking at least, again, offline, I can tell you the one person, but maybe there's others where we could just make sure that this group is down to where it's going to be, and then we might have actually reached quorum tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. I know that there's been a couple of, I know exactly what you're talking about, and it was on my radar to touch base at some point about with the group at that. So maybe Dave,
So
if
far,
you're
we've been doing pretty well, but like,
Mhm.
if it happens every now and then. And oh, sorry, then actually my real question was, how many chapters are left? Not that this isn't great, but just
So we're working on packaging, copy editing, and non-chapter elements. That is to say, introduction and all the other areas that go up front in the plan. So these are all the chapters.
oh, great. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think I have a complete record of attendance. Yeah, Fiona, you may have as well, but I've got a spreadsheet with all the attendance marked down.
and do we want to talk about the MBTA stuff in December? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's Alina, unless you and CMRPC team have any other thoughts, I think, yeah, that's fine. We had a kind of preliminary discussion with the planning board, and just like the timing of that particular conversation, we thought maybe it's a longer term goal to work towards via the master plan, versus trying to get something implemented for upcoming town meeting, just based on what we heard at the previous town meeting. So yeah, Gabe, I think we have some time to tease that out and kind of work through what that's gonna look like. So
Yeah, we should meet before the next master plan meeting, maybe to talk about it.
sure.
Cool. And from my end, I think if we want to talk about this at master plan from like the DLTA perspective, I can work on it as a master plan component potentially. It doesn't have to be that once the year is up. So I'm not concerned in that sense.
Well, if that's it then. Since we don't have a quorum, we can't actually vote to adjourn, but we can
Right.
just declare the meeting completed and we'll meet again on December 2nd.